In my family, a daughter's worth was measured by her weight. The heavier she was, the higher her bride price. So every girl was sent to the fattening house at 13, where she had 2 years to gain 200 pounds, or face punishment. I found my grandmother's hidden death ledger, a record of 47 girls who had died in the process, along with their sale prices and the profit made from each one. When I started teaching the other girls chemistry, how to fake weight gain with salt water and concealed padding, the whole system began to crack. In our family, skinny daughters were considered worthless, and fat ones were walking currency. The more you weighed, the more dowry you brought. Every girl entered the fattening house by 13, for a minimum of 2 years. Gaining weight wasn't optional, it was survival. I grew up watching my older cousins vanish behind those doors, walking in on their own and being wheeled out when they could no longer stand. My cousin Lena entered at 115 pounds and came out at 340. She was married off within a week to a man who paid extra for her stretch marks. They called them beauty lines, but I saw how she struggled to breathe just walking to the altar. The process was simple. 6 meals a day, each monitored by the house mothers. We'd sit in a circle as bowls of mashed millet mixed with butter, sugar, and camel milk were poured down our throats. If you vomited, you had to eat it again. Waste nothing. Gain everything, my aunt would chirp, while girls sobbed into their bowls. Minimum of 4,000 calories per meal. They had tricks to boost hunger, salt baths for water retention, pills to spike your appetite. I was forbidden from exercising, except for throat stretches to help me swallow faster. My sister Zara tried to do squats in secret. They caught her and force-fed her until her stomach nearly ruptured. As punishment, she was forced to eat, standing up for a full month. I was 11 when I found the death ledger in my grandmother's closet while looking for Eid money. 3 full notebooks filled with names and weights. Lena, age 22, heart failure, 389 pounds. Faria, 19, diabetic coma, 412 pounds. Mariam, 24, stroke, 445 pounds. Page after page of girls who never made it to 30. But it wasn't just the numbers that made me sick. It was the profit column. Next to each death, my grandmother had written how much money the family made. Bride price minus funeral costs. Faria's death netted the family $85,000. Her husband kept the dowry even though she died 4 months after the wedding. That's when I started planning. I was careful, strategic. I told everyone I was starting a traditional cooking circle for younger girls, meant to prepare them for the fattening house. We met every Thursday in my uncle's garage. On the surface, we were learning heritage recipes, but in reality, I was teaching chemistry. The precise ratio of salt to water to retain 20 pounds of fluid for weigh-ins. How to build fake fat suits from layered fabric and memory foam. Ways to trigger short-term bloating that would fade after inspections. We got creative fast. We practiced eating competitions, where girls would stuff food in their cheeks and later spit it out in secret. We brewed herbal teas that suppressed appetite while making our faces appear puffy. We made weight gain shakes that were actually protein powder mixed with mild laxatives. The house mothers thought we were the most dedicated girls they'd ever seen. My smartest idea? I suggested we document our progress for future marriage ads. We took pictures but learned the camera tricks. The exact angles and clothing choices that made us look 50 pounds heavier. We bought a broken scale that added 80 pounds and secretly swapped it during official weigh-ins. By the time I turned 13 and entered the house myself, I had built a network of 15 girls, all trained in the art of fake fattening. We shared weighted clothing, perfected our slow walks and heavy breathing. We learned how to pose our arms in photos to make them look bulkier. The house mothers couldn't stop praising us. "Look how well Nora's gaining," they'd say, watching me step onto the tampered scale. We were their stars, all while flushing thousands of calories down the toilet every night. Some girls learned to vomit silently. Others mastered the technique of hiding food in their cheeks while making it look like they swallowed. We turned survival into a performance, a carefully choreographed rebellion under their noses. But everything unraveled at my cousin Deka's marriage preview. She was supposed to be 300 pounds after 2 years in the house. The groom's family was expecting a massive bride, but during the clothing removal ceremony, her fake fat suit shifted. And they saw the truth. Deka was barely 130 pounds. The room exploded. The groom's family shouted fraud. They demanded their money back. My uncle grabbed Deka by the hair, screaming about dishonor and disgrace. But then something happened. Something beautiful. 23 girls stood up at once. Without a word, they began peeling off their own fat suits. Weighted hems thudded to the floor like thunder. Foam padding, hidden fabric, and sweat-soaked wraps came off in waves. Gasps echoed around the room. I pulled out my phone and held it high, scrolling through photos I'd taken of the death ledger. 3 full notebooks of girls who had been loved into an early grave, overfed for profit. While the family shouted about tradition, shame, and betrayal, someone had already called the police. The chaos was like a dam breaking. Mothers shrieked, fathers roared. The groom's family tried to push through the crowd, demanding explanations. My grandmother's face turned purple as she realized her empire was falling, undone by every thud of dropped weights on the ground. I kept my phone raised high as officers entered the room. They froze at the sight. Dozens of girls removing layers of fake flesh, sobbing families accusing each other, the air thick with grief and truth. My mother lunged for my wrist, trying to wrestle the phone from my hand. Her nails dug into my skin, but I broke free, stepping toward the lead officer, a woman with gray at her temples. One glance at the death records on my screen, and she called for backup immediately. She began separating the girls from their families, building a protective circle as more officers arrived. My grandmother forced her way through the crowd, her cane cracking against the tile. She reached for Deka, who stood in nothing but her underclothes, trembling. But 3 girls moved between them instantly, locking arms to shield her. Then the house mothers arrived, summoned by frantic calls. They stopped dead when they saw what we'd done. Their prize pupils, once their pride, now exposed as ordinary teenagers in rebellion. One fainted on the spot when she noticed the broken scale in the corner, its modified parts clearly visible. The police spent hours taking statements. Each girl told her story while furious relatives paced outside, some yelling threats through the windows. My uncle tried to force his way back into the house twice before officers restrained him. By dawn, 23 families had daughters who'd revealed the lie. Some parents wept when they saw their daughters' real bodies, not out of shame, but with sheer relief. Others raged, furious over lost bride prices and soiled reputations. The divide cut straight through bloodlines. What came next moved quickly. Within days, half the families withdrew their daughters from our group, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. My own parents locked me in my room, taking turns watching the door so I couldn't escape or contact the others. From the other side of the wall, I could hear my grandmother calling emergency meetings with the other matriarchs. I pressed my ear to the plaster, listening to them whisper strategies for damage control, relocating the fattening house, hiring guards, installing surveillance, tightening control. But we were ready. Before the wedding viewing, I'd uploaded the entire death ledger to multiple cloud accounts and shared access with trusted allies. Even locked in my room, I knew the evidence was beyond their reach. My sister Zara was their first target. They dragged her back to the fattening house with a personal monitor to watch her every bite. But Zara had learned from us. She could hold food in her cheeks for hours, letting it dissolve slowly instead of swallowing. The house mothers grew suspicious and cruel. They added new rules. Girls had to open their mouths after each bite, show under their tongues and inside their cheeks. They weighed them before and after bathroom trips. They installed cameras in the dorms. But we adapted. Girls learned to trigger vomiting using pressure points. Others discovered spice blends that caused temporary bloating, mimicking weight gain. We passed secrets through lullabies and coded songs during forced rest periods. 3 weeks after the wedding viewing, Amina was the first to break. The pressure became too much for Amina. Her family threatened her younger sisters, and her resolve crumbled. One night, she appeared at my window, tears streaking down her face, whispering that she was going to comply. She'd returned to the fattening house willingly. Her betrayal hurt, but I understood. Not everyone could hold up under their mother's tears or their father's fury. From the beginning, we'd known that some would break when the cost became real. The police investigation moved at a crawl. Officers interviewed each family, but many girls retracted their statements after being pressured. Parents claimed the death records were fake, that we'd been corrupted by modern ideas. The broken scale helped our case, but it wasn't enough for real charges. Not yet. Then my aunt showed up with an offer. If I publicly apologized and submitted to fattening, they'd reduce my sentence to just 6 months. She presented it as mercy, a chance to restore honor with minimal sacrifice. I refused. That night, they moved me to my grandmother's compound, where the surveillance was tighter. No phone, no visitors, no way to reach the outside world. They believed that isolation would break me, but they underestimated the bond we girls had forged. Even separated, we found ways to communicate. Laundry lines became message carriers. Kitchen workers whispered secrets between houses. Younger children, unaware of their roles, became messengers in our invisible network. It amazed me how a group of teenage girls had created a resistance right under the noses of powerful matriarchs. We'd built fake fat suits, rigged scales, disguised chemistry lessons as cooking clubs. We turned survival into strategy. The first real victory came from Fatima. Despite the threats, she didn't recant. She gave the police detailed testimony, the force feeding, the punishments, the health complications. Her courage lit a fire in others. 3 more girls stepped forward to support her claims. That's when the investigation widened. Health inspectors arrived at the fattening house. What they found would haunt them. The inspectors documented everything. They found girls with untreated diabetes, dangerously high blood pressure, and damaged joints from forced inactivity. Mattresses were soaked with sweat. Ankles were swollen, skin raw. The feeding logs read like torture manuals. Relentless calorie counts. Round-the-clock schedules that even professional eaters would have struggled with. There were no medical professionals, no oversight, just relentless weight gain or punishment. My grandmother responded with ruthless efficiency. She gathered the matriarchs to form a unified front. They claimed it was cultural persecution. They hired expensive lawyers and framed the investigation as an attack on sacred tradition. But their unity didn't last. Some mothers, after seeing the death records and medical reports, began to question. Whispers of doubt spread in kitchens, at markets, over late-night tea. Not everyone was willing to sacrifice their daughters for a dowry anymore. The turning point came when Mara's mother found her daughter's hidden journal. It was filled with page after page of quiet suffering, every forced feeding, every punishment. She wrote about stomach pain that kept her awake at night, about crying herself to sleep. Her mother read it all, then brought both the journal and her own testimony to the police. She exposed the price negotiations, the pressure on mothers to produce valuable daughters, and the profits hidden behind the practice. Her betrayal of the matriarchs sent shockwaves through the community. That night, I watched from my window as car after car arrived at my grandmother's compound for an emergency meeting. The shouting lasted until dawn. Some families demanded they ramp up the fattening process before authorities could shut it down. Others pushed for negotiation, or at least medical reform, setting weight limits involving doctors. But my grandmother and her core supporters refused any compromise. Their wealth had been built on this system. They weren't going to let it go easily. By the end of the night, the community had fractured into clear camps. Some families quietly pulled their daughters out of the fattening houses. Others doubled down, moving their operations underground to places where the inspectors couldn't reach. My captivity didn't end. It got worse. They moved me to an interior room, windowless, lit only by a single bulb and a tiny ventilation grate near the ceiling. 2 women stood guard outside my door at all times. No contact, no light, no voice from the outside world. 3 meals arrived daily, carefully measured, meant to begin my own fattening. But I used every trick I had taught the others. I hid food in my cheeks and let it dissolve slowly. I triggered my gag reflex with practiced tongue movements. I took hours to finish a single bowl of millet porridge. The guards grew frustrated, reporting my resistance to my grandmother. She arrived the next day with reinforcements. 4 women held me down, while a 5th tried to insert a feeding tube down my throat. I thrashed. I bit. I kicked. The process failed. They eventually gave up, but not before leaving bruises across my arms and ribs. My grandmother just stood there, watching in silence, her face carved from stone. The compound turned into a fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter. Deliveries were searched, laundry checked. Even the youngest children were questioned about suspicious behavior. My grandmother knew we still had a network, and she feared it. And still, the news reached me. One sympathetic guard, pretending to inspect the room, whispered updates. The investigation had expanded. Officials from the capital were now involved, looking into similar practices in other regions. Our rebellion had become something bigger than us. Other families panicked. Reports came in of girls being force-fed 247, their protests silenced with sedatives. Some were gaining 50 pounds in a single month. The fattening houses had turned desperate, trying to save what was left of their power before the system collapsed. My own family began to splinter under the pressure. One night, my mother visited me in secret. Her face was wet with tears. She begged me to submit, not for the tradition, but for our family's reputation. She spoke of shame, of the market whispers, of other women turning their backs on her. I said nothing, not a word. Her guilt wasn't my burden to carry. My father took a different approach. He came with photo albums, pages filled with brides smiling beside their grooms, dressed in elaborate fabrics, weighed down with jewels and fat. He pointed to them, saying, "This is what works. This is how our family has survived. This is how daughters are cared for, through tradition." But all I saw were haunted eyes behind forced smiles. I remembered the death books, the profit margins scribbled next to each girl's name. His words felt hollow, like trying to explain love with a ledger. The breakthrough came from someone no one expected. Salma, My cousin, my grandmother's favorite. She was loyal, raised by the old woman after her parents died. She had always played by the rules. But Salma stumbled upon something hidden deep in the compound's old storage room. A second set of records. These weren't just recent. They went back 50 years. Generations of ledgers, hundreds of deaths. A detailed evolution of feeding techniques. Letters between matriarchs discussing strategy. How to increase weight gains. How to hide deaths from authorities. How to maximize bridal profits. Salma was faced with a choice. Loyalty to the woman who raised her, or justice for the girls who never made it past 25. She chose justice. At night, she photographed every page and smuggled the memory card out through a kitchen worker we trusted. The evidence reached the investigators within days. Those records destroyed the last illusions of culture. This wasn't tradition. It was business, refined and perfected over decades to turn daughters into currency. The matriarchs began to panic. Several house mothers, now facing possible prison time, offered to cooperate with the investigation. They told everything. The suppliers who sold appetite enhancers, the doctors who forged medical certificates, the network of families sharing techniques and profits. Inside the compound, the tension thickened. Guards muttered among themselves. Some left without warning, unwilling to face arrest. Cooks reduced portion sizes. Even my grandmother's most loyal allies began to shift uneasily. Then came the final stage of my imprisonment. They stripped my room of all furniture. No bed, no chair, only a thin mat on cold concrete. Meals became irregular, sometimes cold, sometimes skipped. They wanted to starve me into submission, hoping hunger would make me compliant. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. I exercised in the dark, doing push-ups and squats in silence. I whispered the names from the death books like prayers, vowing not to let their lives be forgotten. I shaped my future testimony in my mind, over and over, preparing to speak when the time came. The investigation grew. Journalists began whispering about our story, though my grandmother's influence kept it from major media. Still, social media spread the truth in code. Cryptic posts, shared warnings, secret signals between sympathetic families. Some of the original girls escaped. They fled to trusted relatives or women's shelters. Each successful escape became a spark. Girls stopped eating. Mothers started asking questions. The government could no longer ignore the momentum. Then the day came. Health officials arrived with court orders. They brought police, social workers, and medical teams. My grandmother's lawyers objected, but it was too late. Room by room, they searched the compound. Every girl was examined, every record seized. When they opened my isolation cell, I could barely stand. 64 days in solitary resistance had left me weak, but alive. The health worker who examined me wept, documenting the bruises from force feedings, the weight loss, the psychological toll. My mother stood outside, crying. I walked past her without a word. The compound emptied. Some girls returned to supportive families. Others were placed in protective custody. My grandmother stood at her window, watching her empire crumble. Her fortune was frozen, her allies interrogated. Still, the work wasn't over. Traditional families regrouped. They built new fattening houses in remote areas. We created safe houses, educational materials, medical support. We taught girls to resist. We supported survivors. We documented everything, especially the death books. They remain our most powerful tool. My sister Sarah still suffers from what was done to her. Damaged joints, breathing issues, but she speaks. She tells her story. She inspires others to fight. My grandmother died unrepentant. At her funeral, the community split once more. Some mourned the matriarch, others exhaled in relief. I attended, standing beside the girl she once tried to silence. That moment, like so many before it, was a quiet revolution. The work continues, and we are not finished.